Welcome everyone to day 3 here at NAB, the Maxon booth here in Las Vegas, Nevada. I'm Matthias, aka Major VFX on all the socials, and we are showcasing amazing artists and how they use Maxon 1 in their workflow. As the week goes on, my voice gets deeper and deeper till it's dug a hole that it can't get out of. So, I'll keep going as long as I can. To my left, I have Gustaf Fjelstrom, who's going to be showcasing, well, it'll be a surprise. So check it out. Hello, Internet. Good morning, good evening, good night. Let's get started.
All right. Good morning. Did you guys, anyone make it out to karaoke last night? No, me neither. I was a good boy and went to bed relatively early anyway. So, welcome to NAB 2024. This is day 3, I think. As Matthias said, my name is Gustaf Fjelstrom, and I am a freelance motion designer out of the Austin, Texas area. And long story short, after 20 years in the digital agency space, I ditched all that and just became a freelance motion designer, where I'm focusing on title design for film, TV, and as well as other miscellaneous motion design projects. And incidentally, I am 5 years old. It was actually, Botched Creative is 5 years old. It was 2019 that I launched Botched Creative officially at NAB 5 years ago. So here we are. So we are now a staff of 5. And let me introduce the crew here. This is, we have Freya, who's the project manager. We have Odin, our creative director. We have Willow, our senior producer. And Gimli, he is my RenderBox thermal output quality assurance manager. So big thanks to them. So anyway, 5 years old. So let's take a quick look at some of the work that I've been doing at Botched Creative over these last 5 years. So here's got a brand new track, brand new reel for 2024. So let's take a look. Thank you. Thanks again to Maxon for having me out here. That came out last year for NAB and just had a blast. And I love being able to share my process with you. So what are we going to look at today? So today we are going out of the lion's den, out of the furnace and into the lion's den. So visualizing the story of Daniel with Maxon 1. So just a little bit of background about this project. This is another project with my friends over at Pixel Preacher. And if you're not familiar with them, they're a company that makes high quality visual assets and templates for churches to use that may not necessarily have the resources to do so. And I've done several projects with them over the years, and they're been a really great partner, mainly because they trust me and I pretty much have creative autonomy with them. So What's not to like about that? I also like these projects because they're a way for me to kind of stretch out, and I get to control like the whole process, start to finish. So I'm a little bit of a control freak like that. So Pixel Preacher approached me last year about doing something for the Book of Daniel for their library. So, and when I'm working on these projects, I kind of have to fit them in with my other projects because between you and me, I kind of put way more into them than they're paying me for. So, again, these projects are a good way for me to stretch out and try new things and learn new techniques. So hopefully we can learn a couple things together today. So. That being said, I'm right in the middle of this project, so it's very much a work in progress. But it's a good opportunity to kind of have this fresh in my mind as we're talking about some of these concepts here. So, all right, let's dig in. So, what are we going to look at today specifically? So, I'm going to give a process overview of the entire kind of production process that I usually take. And then I'm going to have a very specific sort of high-level overview of the pipeline from ZBrush to Cinema 4D to Redshift and Red Giant. So that is what we are about today. So let's take a quick look at just the process overview. And this kind of changes from project to project, but this is kind of the basic overall scheme where starting out with ideation and research, jumping into some concept development with some mood boards and style frames, blocking things out in an Anomatic, doing quite a bit of R&D and sculpting on this project, so that's new for me, as well as the build out in Cinema 4D, and then texturing and lighting in Redshift, and rendering in Compositive and After Effects, with a particular focus with the Red Giant toolset. All right, so let's jump into kind of how this all began. So with my first step is just lots of research. So in this case in particular, I needed to sort of go back and relearn the story of Daniel. So, I mean, I kind of grew up in Sunday school, so I kind of knew the story. So, but just going back as an adult, or at least older, I needed to kind of dig in and really look for some nuances in the text. So one of the good resources I used was this, the Bible Project. They have like these really awesome breakdowns of the books of the Bible. So shout out to them. And that kind of leads into my brainstorming. And for lately, I've been using a program called Miro for brainstorming, and it's just a visual way to get all my ideas out into one place. And here, I'm making lists. I'm putting things into buckets. I'm just trying to organize my ideas and sort of visually see what I'm thinking about, so that I can start making connections. And so, I just try to generate as many sort of inputs as possible, so that I can kind of dig below the surface to kind of reveal something new. So in tandem with that is image research, and this pretty common for projects like this for me. And I'm very much of like the shotgun approach of just trying to get as many inputs as possible, just so that I can sort of saturate my mind's eye, and so that I can kind of get beyond the initial impressions that I have. And usually it ends at like just Google and Pinterest, but one app that really made a big impact on my process this time was Midjourney. And so I'm just going to touch on AI briefly. I'm not trying to start a fight, because I know there's lots of controversy about Midjourney, but I'll just explain a little bit how I like to use it. Typically when I'm looking for images, I'm typing in, search terms into Google and Pinterest, and that only turns up so much. But like for instance, in the case of this project, you'll see I'm kind of exploring these little wooden carved figures. Well, with Midjourney, I'm able to input pretty much exactly what I'm looking for, and not just get a couple of results back, but just get, dozens, if not hundreds, of images that I can choose from to work with. So I'm very much using it as a augmented image search as far as reference and inspiration goes. So that is just a slight AI detour. So we'll move on from AI right now. So the result of all these inputs, both words and images, is the development of a concept. And again, with all these inputs, I kind of take them and let them all kind of mix together and get saturated. And then like the good ideas come to the surface. So with that, I work to crystallize my ideas in a concept pitch, which I'll then send over to the client. And we're going to take just a look at a couple of the pages for this. So for the overall concept for this piece, I was going with the Babylonian automaton puppet show, which, bear with me, that'll make sense in a minute. But I was kind of envisioning this little miniature puppet stage setup with red velvet curtains, some atmospheric lighting, and some distressed wooden boards. And those would be populated with these automaton sculptures. So I became endlessly fascinated with these little sculptures. And if you've not seen them, they're traditionally hand carved, and they're all actuated by gears and rods, and they're just mechanical fascinations. And I found them really inspiring. And I thought that would be a good sort of visual tool to kind of illustrate what's going on in the story. So that was the seed for that. And then here's where Midjourney really was sort of had a big impact on the process. And again, I was able to input exactly kind of what I was looking for, and then just get lots of results. And so here's some of the best ones that I kind of curated from that. And just take note of the image in the top left of that figure there praying. That was really kind of emblematic of the kind of the look I was going for. So that kind of served as a guide going forward. I also included some mood boards of some artifactual and historical elements, just to kind of counterbalance our sort of mechanical contraptions that we were going for as well. And at this stage of the process, it was a little early for me to do full-on style frames, but I wanted to do something that was a little more detailed than mood boards. So I made these mood frames where I just took my image research and some of my Midjourney outputs and just photo bashed them together, ran them through some comping just to give them some color and some life, just to kind of set the tone for the piece in general. So this actually served as a really good guide moving forward. So from there, it was on to storyboards. My background is in illustration, so any chance I can take to draw, I'll take it. So these may not be as fleshed out as I normally do sometimes, but it's important to get the basic idea across, and I just wanted to sketch out the basic story beats so that I could communicate that to the client, and also leave some room for the client to be included in the process as well. So this kind of just, each step of this process just kind of serves as a little stake in the ground to kind of keep moving forward. So moving on from the storyboards, for this project in particular, I needed to do a lot of research and development because there were a few things that I knew I needed to figure out first. So we'll look at some of this a little bit later, but with those curtains, I was going to have to play with a lot of cloth. So super thankful for the new cloth engine in Cinema 4D, which made it really a breeze. Also, a big part of that was going to be the mechanical rigging of these little puppets. So I spent some time just experimenting with some simple dynamic setups with bones and inverse kinematics, and also just some simple espresso, just to kind of see what kind of motion I could get with these puppets in an actual sort of realistic rigging fashion. And then also there was some quite a bit of destruction that I'm still playing with. And again, this is still work in progress, so there's lots more I need to do. So from here, it was creating an animatic. That was taking my storyboards and just working very quickly in Cinema 4D, just rendering out viewport renders and just blocking things out, making sure I had sort of the timing kind of right, and just overall just making sure that the vision for the story beats that I originally had in my storyboards was going to work. So I rented out viewport renders and cut them against the music and went back and forth, and I really like working iteratively like that, so I can just quickly make changes and just bounce back and forth between Cinema 4D and Premiere. All right, so that is the work that I've done so far on the Daniel project. But today we are going to look more specifically in detail on creating an actual style frame for this. So this is one of the story beats of Daniel in the lion's den. And again, work in progress, but this is kind of far enough along that I wanted to share some of the progress with you. So what we're going to look at specifically is really the whole sort of pipeline of the Maxon 1 product. So sculpting in ZBrush, building this out in Cinema 4D, rendering it in Redshift, and comping in After Effects, specifically with the Red Giant tool set. Okay, so first part of that was the sculpting. So just huge disclaimer, I am very much brand new to sculpting. I've only been doing it seriously for six months or so. So I'm in no position to give anybody like super granular detailed advice about sculpting, but I can give you a few tips on some of the basic concepts that I found very helpful as I'm still learning ZBrush. So, and this is, again, vastly oversimplified, but it has a lot of parallels to my traditional art education with my illustration to begin with. Is working with the basic concept of working with your primary forms, getting those correct before moving on to your secondary forms, and again, making sure those are correct before getting on to your tertiary forms, and then finally your details that go across all of that. So to look at this visually, so for instance, here's a lion that I'm sculpting. And for this project in particular, it was a good kind of starter project for ZBrush because I didn't need to sculpt like ultra photorealistic lions. I just needed to sculpt lions that looked like they had been carved out of chunks of wood. So actually blocking it out literally with blocks of digital clay. So this would be an example of getting my primary forms in place first. And here's a shot of what getting those secondary forms refined might look like. So putting in a little bit more detail. I'm still kind of roughing out the form, just kind of making broad strokes, broad changes. And then working on tertiary detail. Now I've got much more detail in the lion's mane. I'm refining like the muscles and the structure, but everything is built on the secondary and the primary shapes that I've already completed. And then on top of that is the level of detail. And in this case, it's sort of all this high frequency detail of wood texture that I'm putting over the line. And this is the really fun part. So it's really easy to kind of jump to this stage like too early. So I very much have to kind of restrain myself to do that. So in addition to that, the concept of basic sculpting, there was also a technical workflow that I needed to understand as well, and that was high poly and low poly and displacement. So you can have a sculpt that has a high poly count, so millions and millions of polygons. So the more polygons and more points you have, the more detailed your sculpt is. But the heavier it is and the more difficult it is to work with, especially when you're animating. So when you need to animate things, to work with it optimally, ideally you want to have a lower poly version of that, so lower resolution in your mesh, but then you lose the detail. Well, the way you get that back is through the use of displacement maps. So let's take a quick look at what that looks like. So here's a lion I was sculpting, and this is the high poly version. So it's about 3 million points, which in the in the scheme of sculpting, it's not huge, but it's still 3 million. You compare that to this low poly version, which is 11,000 points. So this is obviously going to be much more easy to work with in Cinema 4D as far as animating and working with it, but it's not detailed. But with Cinema 4D and Redshift and using displacement maps, I can use that same low poly geometry and still have all that high frequency, high fidelity detail. So you can see the lion here has very low resolution, but using displacement maps in Redshift and Cinema 4D, now I have all that detail back. So once I got my head around those basic concepts, I just kind of was like off to the races, and I was just trying to sculpt as much as possible, because that's really the only way to get anywhere in any kind of new software, is just getting in daily or as much as you can, and just putting in the reps. And part of that is a shout out to Sculpt Club. So thanks to Jags He's over there not paying attention, but that's okay. He hosts a weekly sculpting Discord hangout where we're just get on and sculpt for an hour or two and just have fun. And that becomes a nice little motivation to kind of keep things moving. So shout out to Sculpt Club. All right, cool. I think we're right on target here. So let's go over to Cinema 4D now. And we're going to look at how this scene was built up. So actually first we're going to, this is over what we're going to look in Cinema 4D. So I'll talk a little bit about my scene setup with the organization and all that. We're going to look at some texturing in Redshift, as well as the lighting. And then we're talking a little bit about the rendering with my Asus workflow. So let's go to Cinema, and here we are. So this is my scene, and let me just jump out of my camera here. I like to try to keep things as simple as possible until I don't have to. So for this particular shot, I didn't build like the whole stage or anything. It's really just a floor and a backdrop with some curtains, and then all my hero figures sort of populated in there. So just quickly on some file organization. Super important to keep my Cinema 4D files organized. So I typically have these three main goals: lights, camera, and scene. Pretty self-explanatory what goes in each of those. So that's why I can kind of keep things very tidy. I love these little folder icons that you can assign with your nulls. So shout out to the Cinema 4 team for that. I'm also making extensive use of the layers palette. So here I have all of my sort of scene ingredients broken out into layers so that I can quickly isolate things. So if I want to just solo up my Daniel character there, I can do that. Solo up my lions. And that's just a way of keeping things organized and just quickly navigable. So there's that. So let's jump back into my scene here. Cool. For the cloth here, I have a quick demo of the cloth. So so the curtains I made with the help of the Cinema 4D cloth engine. So and it's super nice. So all this is a plane, and I've subdivided this plane pretty high. It's like 100 segments, and this is the default size of a plane. And then I have a second plane, which I'm using as, actually we'll call this my curtain. And we'll call this one my rod. And both of these have a cloth tag on them. Okay, I've just basically the default settings on the cloth tag. On the rod cloth tag though, I have, in the mix animation tab, I've checked with pins. So that means this one's not gonna move, it's just gonna act as a pin for the cloth. Also on the curtain rod, I have this connector tag. And you can see if I zoom in here, we have these connectors, because actually the rod has about a quarter of the points that the cloth does. So it's on this connector here, it's looking for points that are within 4 centimeters. And then I've clicked create, and now it's created connection between these points, because these are all within 4 centimeters. So that is the basic setup. And then when you click play, you can see now we are getting a very simple cloth simulation. I'm just going to extend my timeline here. But this doesn't look as nicely bunched up as like closed curtains. So the way that I did that was simply scaling down my rod. So here I went to the beginning of my timeline, select my rod, did a keyframe on the width, and then this went forward to like frame 40. And let's go half that width. So 200, click another keyframe, go back to the beginning, and then re-simulate that. And now as my curtain rod is shrinking, it's actually folding in those curtains and getting them to where they're draping just really nice. And so for the actual scene, I use a much bigger piece of geometry for that. But yeah, that's the simple way of creating curtains. So, and actually how I'm wrangling that in my scene. So my scene doesn't have animation for the curtains. So I just needed geometry. So all I did was just right click on my curtain and select current state to object. I'm going to turn off my other ones and delete the cloth tag there. And now we have curtains that are just piece of geometry. So they're super easy to work with. And you may notice that the geometry doesn't have a terrible amount of resolution. I could either resim with more segments, or I can just put this all into a subdivision surface. And now we've got nice, smooth curtains. And for a bonus tip here, let's say that I did want some subtle animation in here. One of my favorite tricks is using the wind deformer. So not a force, but a wind deformer. So if I put this under my curtain, you can see the default state is not really working. So I'm going to uncheck flag, turn the FY all the way down, and I'm going to bring this amplitude down to maybe about 5, and the size, again, maybe about 5, and then turn the frequency up. So now when we play, we've got some subtle rippling animation in the cloth, and there's no dynamics here on this one now. It's just if I wanted to have these curtains but not have them be so static. So that's just a cheap trick that I like to use. So okay, don't need to save that. All right, let's go back to our scene. All right, let's talk about texturing a little bit. So I have a separate scene that I'll kind of show up a little bit. So here is our buddy Daniel, and you can see this sculpt is relatively low res, right? And we talked about the high poly to low poly transition there. So let me bring up my Redshift render view, and we'll take a look at what Daniel looks like in Redshift. So you can see now he's got much more detail, and that is because we're using the displacement map. So let me, here, we'll put him over here, and I'll open up my materials. And don't be scared by the sort of node setup here. We're going to walk through this. But real quick, let me just show you what this looks like without the displacement map. So for that, I'm just going to put a standard material on there. Let's close that. So instead of the wood texture, this is just a standard material. And for displacement, we will turn this off. So I set that to 0. So you can see, yeah, very much looks like our low resolution sculpt, right? So with the displacement map, so this is a texture that is driving this displacement map, and if I put it back up to, if I can get it again, here we go. Why is it not selecting? Here we go. Oh. There we go. Get up. And if I put it back up to what it was at about 50, you can see now all of that high frequency detail is now back in our model. So I'm getting the best of both worlds. I can manipulate Daniel, because eventually I'll have to animate him, but I will get all that detail back in. So let's put our wood texture back on him, and let's just take a quick tour through this wood texture. So I have lots of Redshift libraries, but and I tried lots of wood materials, but I wasn't really happy with what I was finding. So I ended up just making my own procedural shader. So we're going to go through that here. So this may look relatively complicated, but it's fairly straightforward once you sort of dig into the ingredients. So it all starts with these two color layers. So I'm going to solo up this color layer. So now we're looking at just the diffuse color that is underneath our model here. And this color layer is layering up 7 different layers. So we'll start with just a base color. This is just the overall color of our object. And then I'll turn on our color layer, and I'll turn off all of our other layers, and I'll bring them on as we need them. Okay, so that's our base layer. Oop, got one more. That's our base layer. So I'm a huge fan of layering up Maxon noises. So this first noise is a simple FBM noise, one of my favorite noises. And that is going into a ramp, which is colorizing that noise and giving it a little bit of contrast. And then that is going into layer 1 on my color layer. And with the mask parameter, you can blend that up or down to taste. So that's a good way to kind of control your materials. And the reason I'm doing this is because I just want to have some breakup in the base color, just so it's not a static color. So I have several different noises layered up in the same way. So here's another noise. This one is a booyah noise. And again, that's going into a ramp. And then that is going into layer 2 on my color layer. And again, I'm just barely blending this in. So this is like 0.6, but the more you bring it up, the stronger it is. So let's go back down there. So here's another noise. I got what is that? A Naki noise. And that gets layered in as well. So the process of layering up these noises just kind of gives your material some inherent complexity. So it's not, again, not so static. I'm also layering in some wood grain texture, and I'm not using a texture for this. I'm actually using a Maxon noise. So that is this layer here. But I'm actually doing something with this noise with another noise. So I'm using another noise, this noise here, again going through a ramp, and this is going to a change range node. And what that is letting me do is modulate the scale of the SEMA noise here by this noise. So it's without this change range. So this change range here, I'm going to reset this to like 1 and 1. So this would be just like if I had a scale of 1 for my SEMA noise here. But because I'm using this change range, it's looking at this noise and saying wherever there's white, that's going to be our high value. Wherever there's black, that's going to be our low value. So with the change range here, I'm setting my low value is actually going to be 5, and my high value is going to be 10. So that is telling this SEMA noise that wherever there's black, your scale is going to be 5, and the high scale is going to be 10. So that's just giving me this wavy effect, which is then simulating the wood grain. That noise is going into a ramp to colorize it, and then going into the color layer where I am subtly blending it in. Okay, so I could ramp that way. Oh, that's the wrong one. I could ramp that way up or change the color and just make it more obvious, but I wanted it to be subtle. And then another favorite trick of mine is, or a couple of tricks, is using an ambient occlusion node. So that's what this looks like here. And ambient occlusion is just giving us some shadows in the crevices. And I have that, again, going through another ramp to colorize it. And then into the color layer, and I'm blending that ambient occlusion just, again, very subtly, just to kind of give us a little bit of volume built into the diffuse color. And then my second favorite trick is using the curvature node. So here I'm getting some nice edge wear, and I'm using the curvature node. So the curvature node will accentuate your edges. And I'm again using the same trick of using another noise, this Maxon noise, through a ramp to give it some contrast, through a change range. And that's just, again, I'm setting my base range to 0 and my high range to 3. So that way my curvature will have a variation in the radius as opposed to just being static. So I actually have 2 curvature layers. One looks like that, one looks like this, just to give me some additional texture. And the net result of all of that is this base layer that I'm using for my diffuse color. Now, one of the limitations is that there's only 7 slots for the color layer, and I wanted to go a little further, so I just have the output of that color layer going into this color layer. Because I wanted to bring in some stronger grain for the wood, so I just have another Maxon noise, just set to SEMA, and I have the scale set way up, just so I could get these thin lines. That's going into a ramp to colorize it. And then this is going into a color layer where it's just combining with my other color layer just to give us some deeper grain. Okay, so moving then left to right. So this color layer is going into a color correct, which is just giving me control, sort of global control over the brightness and the darkness and the contrast. And then that is going into the base color of my standard material. That same color layer is also going through this other ramp, which I am using to sort of remap the tones so that it's not as contrasty, because I wanted to have some variation in the reflection roughness, which is how shiny or dull your object is in Redshift. So I'm using a color invert, because here you'll see that the dark areas will end up being shiny and the light areas will end up being rough, or will not have a reflection. So I wanted that to be inverted, so I just used a color invert node, and I'm feeding that into the reflection roughness. So here the darker areas are more shiny and the brighter areas are less shiny, because that would functionally be like the edges where this little figure would have been handled, etc. So my base color layer is also serving as the bump map. So we have the color layer there, that's going into a ramp. And I wanted to really accentuate the deep grain on the color for the bump map. So I'm multiplying that with the grain there. So now we've got a really deep value for the large grain, and that is going into a bump map. And similar to the roughness, so the black areas would be low and the light areas would be high. So if I go into that and go into the bump map, then that is just giving me some subtle variation in the texture. And that works in conjunction with the displacement map, because that really then takes it over the top. So that is a tour of that shader node, and that's pretty much how I built the shaders for all of the lions as well. All right, perfect, right on time. Okay, so let's close out that one. We'll go back to our main scene. And let me just bring up the render view again, and we'll get this one cooking. So we're going to talk about some of the lighting setup and for rendering. So I'm working in an Asus color space. You may have seen some of my demos before where I'm showing how I'm working with Asus. Asus is just a really excellent color space to work with, and so glad that Cinema 4D supports this natively. And actually, if you want to work in Asus, if you go Control-D into your color settings and into your color management, there's a basic workflow or an Open Color I/O workflow, and I'm using Open Color I/O. So that means what I'm rendering will be Asus CG. That will become very apparent when we're looking at how I'm comping this in After Effects. Okay, so for this scene, at least for my style frame that I'm rendering out EXRs, and I'm using the AOV manager to give me multiple channels. So let's take a look at that real quick. So Redshift AOV manager. So AOVs are a way to get multiple channels in a single file, or separate files if you want. But because I'm working with EXRs, I can render them out. It'll be a single file, but it will contain all these channels. So I have a beauty setup, I have a Z-depth pass, I have an emission pass. I'm not using the volume lighting, I can just delete that. And then I have two puzzle mats. I mean, I could use crypto mats, but they kind of mess up my naming and tokens, so I'll figure that out later. But I'm using two puzzle mats so that I can pull keys from certain elements, and then a volume fog emission. And we can take a look at each of those in our Redshift viewer by viewing these channels here. So like here is my, I need to turn on bucket rendering for that. But like my, my beauty pass, my emission pass, or I gotta wait for that to finish rendering. We'll take a look at that here in just one sec. Okay. So for my lighting, I'm also using light groups. So if I go to my beauty pass here, Under light groups, you see I'm using all light groups. Now I've really only set up 2 light groups. One is my background spots, and one is my Daniel rays here. So in my scene here, you see I've got these atmospheric spotlights. I've got the foreground one for Daniel, and then these background ones for green. Well, I want to be able to control those separately in comp. So by using light groups, I can separate those out. So this is going to tell Redshift to render the background spots and the Daniel rays separately. And then for the remainder, for the global AOV, it's just going to be whatever lights aren't in a group. So what that looks like is this. So this is my other pass. So this is just the beauty pass without the background spots and without the Daniel rays. And I have a separate channel for my background spots and another channel for my rays. And those will all be put together in After Effects, which makes it super, super flexible that way. Okay, cool, awesome, right on time. So from here, we're gonna jump over to After Effects and show you how I comp this together. All right, so here we are. And this is my scene setup as it exists. So let me just turn off some of my color correction here. And we'll just step through some of the passes. So again, here's our spotlight pass. Here's our Daniel rays pass. This is my other pass. This is my depth pass. So my depth pass is giving me camera data information so that anything that's white is far away from the camera, anything that's black is closer to the camera. So that's very helpful for certain effects, to adding in even more atmosphere if I wanted to. Got my emissions pass, my puzzle mat, just to give me some selections so that I can control elements better. And I just have another one just to give me some additional control there. Well, you may be asking, just a note on After Effects. After Effects does support Asus natively, but I don't use After Effects' color management because I don't trust it. I've been bitten way too many times by color profile, so I actually have all color management turned off, and I am using the OpenColor.io plugin for After Effects just to make sure that what I'm seeing is what I'm outputting. So I have an adjustment layer on top of everything that is doing my conversion from Asus CG to Rec 709, which is so if I turn that off, this is what it just looks like when it's in Asus CG. So once that's on, now I know I can see here my input space is Asus CG, my output space is Rec 709. So I know for sure that I'm outputting the correct color value. And actually, this actually works out. It works really well too. So let's say, for instance, I'm part of a larger pipeline and we're not working in Rec 709. Let's say it needs to go to like a colorist who needs another profile. So I could just select another output space, and let's say Asus CCT. So that obviously looks terrible, but this is a log format that a colorist could then use and still have all of the color available. So, but for my purposes, I'm just using Rec 709. Cool. So you may ask yourself, well, why bother with Asus if it looks fine in Cinema and in Rec 709? Why bother? Well, Asus has a very wide color gamut, and it is very efficient at controlling your exposure. So just as an example here, I have another comp that's set up. So this is a separate render. This is just a PSD of that same frame. And this is not an Asus CG. This is already in Rec 709, so it's like an RGB image. Looks identical, that's fine. But if I were to drastically affect the exposure of this, you can see I've completely destroyed the image. So you can see on the scopes here, I'm totally clipping everything here. There's like no information in those brights at all. And even going the other way, if I go -5, oh, excuse me, oh, that's even worse, -5, it's just crunching everything down, right? And it's, I'm just bringing the brightness down and it just looks like mud, right? Not so good. So let's put that back to 0. Okay. However, let's go back to our Asus comp. And I have an exposure adjustment here. in my case, I'm only going down a stop, but that's fine. If I were to do that same exposure, in fact, let's go one more with 6. Yeah, that's not great, and I wouldn't do this. But you can see I'm not clipping. I mean, the reds are up there, but they're not clipping. I still have all of this information in here. So it's just giving me a ton of latitude in how I'm combining my comp layers, as opposed to being limited to that sRGB gamut. This is in the Asus color gamut. You have much more latitude, and even going the other way. So -6, you can see I've not flatlined everything down here. Like even my fire up here is like still up in the 90s. In this area here. So it's a much more flexible way of working with color and compositing. So and it took me a long time to actually figure out what the benefit of Asus was and how I could work with it. But ever since then, I can't go back to just rendering PNG files. So actually, let's go back to -1 there. Okay. All right, so that is Asus in a nutshell. Let's talk about our comping here. So I have the way I set up my comp files is I have all my puzzle mats and stuff at the bottom of my comp here, and you don't see them because they're at the bottom of the layer. But if I solo them up, they're here. And then so I'm starting here with my base layer. This is my beauty other pass. Let's turn off my exposure and my other passes. So this is, again, that pass that is my main beauty pass without the spotlights. And so what I'm doing is I'm adding those back in. So let's take a look at my spotlights here. I can turn those on. And the advantage of doing it this way is now I have more granular control over my spotlights. If I wanted to make them more better, I can add an exposure to those, and let's just pump that up 5 spots. So now, without having to re-render in Cinema, I can now have more granular control over those spotlights. Or if I wanted to make them less visible, I can go the other way as well. Or I can change the gamma on that and just make them a little more subtle that way. So having those in passes just gives me a lot of flexibility in comp. So that's the same then for the Daniel rays that are coming down. In fact, I think I have an exposure on there as well. This also lets you change the color of things too. I didn't need to in this instance, but I could very much just change the hue and the saturation of that color to better match. So let me add in here my emission pass, and same thing there. So I can adjust the intensity of my emission as well. And so yeah, it just gives us a great amount of flexibility. So why the puzzle mats too? So you can see here my puzzle mat here. I've got my red channel for Daniel. So let's say I wanted to make some changes just to Daniel, just to bring his levels up a little bit. Well, I'm doing that with this channel here. So I've just duplicated my beauty channel, and I'm using the set mat command, and it's looking at my puzzle mat 1, and it's looking at the effects and masks, and it's giving me the red channel. So now I've set that to be isolating my Daniel figure. So now any effects I apply to that layer, let's say, just so I can show you what that looks like, if I go 2 spots, will only be affecting that spot. So in my case, I'm just going down a little bit, so like -0.5. Okay. So that's how that comes together. So once I have my basic comp together, a lot of times also comping together in practical elements, so like real smoke. I haven't done that yet on this one, but that's also something that I like to include. So then getting into the actual sort of color grading part of the comp, I'm a huge fan of the Red Giant tool set. They pretty much go on everything I do. So in addition to just doing some basic image sort of sweetening with exposure, just making sure the exposures are within acceptable ranges, I usually start off with glow, and the optical glow is one of my favorites. I'm just toggling this on and off, and you can see, and actually I'm just noticing this needs to be set to linear, That's another key feature for Asus is it has to be a linear workflow in 32-bit. So with optical glow, I have it set to linear, and now I can bump up that amount. And you can see it's just giving me a little bit of aerial diffusion where I have the highlights. And actually with that, you can select your threshold with this highlights only, so that you can just bring the glow into the brightest areas. And that just gives us a real nice touch there. And I'm usually very sort of subtle with these effects as well. So just to give it a little bit at each step. So, and not to overdo it. So I have a separate layer to just give Daniel here a little bit of glow. So actually, let me change that to linear, and I can bump that up a little bit. Oh, that's a little too much. Cool. And then let's jump into Magic Bullet Looks, because that's by far my favorite tool in the Red Giant universe. And very happy that the latest versions also support Asus. So you can see here my input, we're still working in the Asus color space. My input is Asus CG, my output is Asus, same as the input. So that just gives me a really cohesive color workflow as we're going through. So even though my work isn't necessarily photorealistic, I like to impart some photographic qualities to my work. So a lot of what's going on in the comp is actually degrading the image. So and that's adding things like optical diffusion, similar to glow, but it's just more subtle, and it's just something that happens with real cameras, in that you get some of this atmospheric kind of diffusion happening in the lens. And that's just a real nice effect. Again, real subtle. Most of what I'm looking at here is mimicking what's happening with real lenses. So that includes lens distortion, just to give me a little bit of messiness around the edge. And this works particularly well with moving cameras too. Lens vignetting is a big thing. It's kind of funny, like in photography, we're always trying to remove all of those artifacts, but with CG work, I'm very much introducing these artifacts. Same thing with chromatic aberration. Very, very subtle on this, but this is, it's maybe a little bit hard to see with here, but you can see a subtle shift in the channels here, which is something, again, that happens with real lenses. And then I love the new halation in Red Giant too, because that just gives me a little bit more energy and mess in the highlights. And then once all that is in place, I'm usually adding in some clarity just to kind of bring back a little bit of sharpness in the image. And with looks, all of these, you can save them as presets. I usually have a sort of a base recipe that I'm working with, and then I just kind of continue tweaking from there. Cool. And you can see actually this the color scheme of this shot was actually informed by those style frames that I did, or those mood frames that I did at the beginning. So that's just something to note there. In addition to just doing some random blurs, again, just to overall sort of distress the image a little bit, I'm usually adding in a layer of sharpen just to kind of bring back some detail. Yes, I know the irony of blurring something and then sharpening it, but it just gives it a different quality to the image, and it's as looking at something that's just not coming straight out of the computer. And then one of the other more important tools in the Red Giant tool set is Renoiser. So with any images, film, digital, whatever, there's always some level of noise. And there's certainly noise in 3D renders, but the problem is that the noise isn't consistent. So with Renoiser, we can introduce a consistent level of noise across all our image. And, I mean, you can certainly abuse it, but I just have it set really subtly, and it might be hard to see on the screen, but toggling it on and off, it just, it's very subtle and hardly noticeable, but just all of these subtleties stacked up just tend to work all together. So that renoise just gives me a very cohesive overall finish to the image. And then usually finishing off with a layer of colorista just to give me that extra level of control over the exposure, and then any last minute color tweaking I need. usually I'll get it to this point and then render out versions, and then once I have all of my shots rendered, I'll go back in and just do fine color correction just to make sure the whole piece is cohesive. So, cool. All right, so let's go back to Keynote here. We looked at all that. We looked at AE. We looked at all that. And that, yeah, that's it. Again, this still very much working on this project, so hopefully in the next month or two we'll have it all wrapped up. Yeah, that is my show, and big thanks to Maxon for having me out. And yeah, once again, I am Gustaf Fjelstrom, and you can reach me at botched.com, but I do not do plastic surgery, so don't ask. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
All right, let's give Gustaf all right, I don't have to ask. Already getting that round of applause. Awesome. So we do have a time for 1 or 2 questions, but he'll also be in the back. Here we go. Question right here up front. I was wondering about building out the displacement map.
Yeah, in ZBrush, there's a function to create a displacement map, and it's just super simple as exporting that map. Yeah.
Quick one. Question.
What's the end product? Is it like a video?
Yeah. Yeah,
So the question is, what is the end product?
Yeah, the end product will be a 1 minute, basically intro animation. This one will just have music and then typography. Yeah, yeah.
Excellent. While you ruminate between our next presenter, we have Gustaf in the back, so he'll be available for the next hour. So any questions you might have, you want to dive into any of the files, go into color theory or anything else. I love the automaton stuff. So great. Yeah, just the creative workflow is great. Excellent job overall. Stay tuned, folks. We're going to be up next with Andy Needham, and he's going to be showcasing the new particle systems in Cinema 4D. So stay tuned. See you soon, Internet.
All right. Thank you.